Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Stealth Hitch rack receiver on a 2022 Tesla Model 3. So it is installed on this vehicle, and you may say, where? Well, and that's kind of the beauty of the Stealth Hitch. It lives up to its name of being rather stealthy, and that is achieved by having a removable receiver tube opening. So in order to get your receiver tube open and put on your vehicle so that way you can actually have your accessories loaded up, on this 2022 there is an access panel here. Now there's going to be two little flathead little turn plastic screws here. Pretty easily just quarter turn these and our panel drops out. And then from here you kind of just slide these tabs out. Once this is out of the way, you can see the opening. Now also, you'll be able to see there's a handle on our passenger side, and that's going to be able to actually disengage this once it's in place, and you have a lock here as well. So once it's in place, no one's going to walk away with the receiver tube opening when it's in its locked position. So when you're ready to go for a bike ride or load up your cargo carrier, it's pretty easy. You'll have this that comes with the actual receiver rack, and you're going to see not for towing. Now this one in particular is meant for just your accessories and has a tongue weight of 350 pounds. So you're able to load up a decent amount with bikes or a cargo carrier, but as far as towing, there is a tow package available. So if that's something that you would like, by all means. Now pretty easy here, just kind of give this a quick push up and you should hear a clunk, and now we have this in place. So you can load up your accessories and be ready to go. It also has a nice opening here for your hitch pin and clip. This is going to be a 5/8 standard size. Now it does not come with a hitch pin and clip. A lot of your accessories that you buy will generally have them, but if you need one or if you want a locking one to keep your accessories locked onto this, we have a wide variety of those here available at eTrailer. Now one thing that you may notice is this does stick down a little bit past the car where it factory was before the tube was there. So you do have a ground clearance here of right at about 8 inches. So it's relatively low, and that's something you're going to want to keep in mind is your accessories loaded up tend to stick out a little bit. So some of them will have a raised shank, but if it is a flat one and you have things loaded up, when you're going up hills, you're going to want to make sure that that doesn't bottom out, or if you're going off some maybe not so smooth pavement or some paths or whatever it may be, keep that in mind. And also you're going to want to keep in mind that you are adding length to the overall of the vehicle. Well, and also with this, we're going to measure that just so you can kind of check your own accessories. Now keep in mind, we're going to measure here from the furthest point on our rear fascia to the receiver tube opening. You are going to be adding some little bit of length to your vehicle, and roughly about 2 inches from the furthest point on the rear fascia. So you're adding that little bit of extra, so just be aware of any curbs or anything like that, but you're also going to be adding accessories to this, so overall length of the vehicle is going to change, so just keep that in mind. That way you're not making contact and damaging your accessories. Now, as far as the installation goes, I will admit it's not exactly the easiest installation because you are going to have to remove the rear fascia and also the bumper support and some brackets there. Now, none of it's too terribly bad, but sometimes taking off the fascia can be a little bit scary. But I'm going to walk you through every single step, and that way I'm there to walk you through it and you can kind of get an understanding of what you're getting into. And really, this is a great option for a hitch because it is very clean looking. So I would say that it's totally worth it to do the install. So let's take a look at that now. To begin our installation, we're going to start by opening up the trunk, as we're going to need to gain access to the taillight area as well as some buttoned up pieces in there, because we are going to have to remove the rear fascia in order to get this hitch on. So let's open up the trunk and get to work. So on the driver's side, we're going to find a plastic rivet. It's just a push button one. Now it's kind of tucked up in there a little bit, so getting a flathead screwdriver might be a little bit tricky, so I'm using a pick here that has an angle to it. And to find it, just follow your plastic down here, and right above this light, you're going to see it living up here. So we'll go ahead, let's get this popped out. It's tucked in there pretty good, so just peel that little top tab open and the rest of it should come out pretty easy here. Now all of your hardware that we're removing, you're going to want to have a nice place to keep these. That way during installation you'll have everything ready. So I suggest having a good way to organize it. I use a muffin tin, a cup, whatever it may be. That way you have all your pieces. Next we're going to take these taillight stops out, and that's just going to be simply rotating these counterclockwise, and we can go ahead and do this on both sides. So now we're going to gain access to the back of our taillights here. We're just simply going to kind of pull this inner liner out. Now the plastic may come down with it, and that should be okay. Just be careful that we're not bending this or deforming it at all. Now part of this is cut out here. There's a little vent, so if you lightly grab there, you're going to be able to get this edge out from the weather stripping here. And we're just going to pull just back a little bit. And what we're gaining is access to our plugs. There's also going to be some 8mm nuts here that we're going to be taking off. So you can see this one here. There should be another one up top. We're going to go ahead and loosen these up, and we're also going to try to get the taillight to move a little bit, and that might gain us a little bit access to the actual plug itself. So first I'm going to go ahead and get these off. Now be careful, as these are pretty small, so if they come loose, you're going to want to make sure you don't drop these. So now we can actually go ahead and unplug our taillight here. You can see this red tab, and that should pull that back, and that'll unlock it. And then you should be able to push on the actual tab here to get this undone. There we go. So now that we have that unplugged, let's see if we can move our taillight a little bit here. Now your charge port may come up at this point, that's okay. We're gonna try to get this out, and what you're gonna want to use is a plastic trim removal tool, and that's gonna allow us to kind of pry this out, as if you wobble it back and forth, it can actually damage the studs of the light. So you wanna make sure to prevent that, and that's gonna be just using this here to kind of pry this straight out. So what I found is your pry point here, you're gonna see this kind of curvature. It dips in here, and you're able to kind of get your plastic pry tool just in this area, and it's gonna allow you to kind of wedge that enough to pry it forward. And again, this is where the plastic trim removal tool really comes in play, as it's not gonna scratch, paint, or anything like that. Now you still wanna be careful, obviously, but this should get us to be able to pry this a little bit. So take your time, and once you kind of get a small gap here, you can kind of work your way down, and this should pop off. And you're gonna see these are the tabs here, those pins that were in this point. So when you are prying it, you can kind of try to get the forked end of a plastic trim removal tool here, and this bottom one's gonna be a little bit tricky, but working your way down, you should be able to get there and kind of pry that and get your taillight out. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do the same process on the passenger side now. Now with our taillights out of the way, we're gonna see we have a 10mm bolt on each side. We'll go ahead and get those removed. So now we're gonna go to our wheel well liner here, and this is going to allow us to separate it from the rear fascia, as we're going to be removing it. So you're going to see there's going to be some plastic push pins. There's going to be 3 of them, and it's going to be hard to see, but they do follow this same kind of linear pattern. So just get those 3 off, and then work your way to where the fascia actually bolts onto the rear quarter panel, and you're going to see there's going to be a T25 that's facing up. So we'll go ahead and get all those removed. Now that T25 can be a little bit tricky, as it wants to catch on the fender liner, so I had to kind of push that fender liner back just to kind of get that bolt head out. But once you have that, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side of the vehicle. So now we're going to be removing the gravel guard from underneath the vehicle, and there's going to be a few hardware bolts here that are all going to be 10mm. So the first thing we're going to want to do, there's going to be these plastic covers. You're going to go ahead, you're going to see there's a slot, so it makes it pretty easy just to put a flathead screwdriver here, pry this open. And that's going to gain us access to a 10mm there. There's also one more on the other side. And then moving forward, you're going to see we're going to have one there, one here. There's one here, and on some models it's going to be a little bit different. There may be another one here. We'll have to check that once we actually kind of lower it down. But for now, I'm going to grab my 10mm socket and get these taken out. So the gravel guard, the hardware's off, and we're actually going to be removing that with the fascia one go. So you don't actually have to remove that, which is going to be nice. Now, since we are getting ready to take the fascia off, a little precaution here, just putting a little bit of painter's tape. Just follow the edge here of the bumper. And you're also going to want to run it up on the quarter panel as well. So we're going to have 2 strips of tape, and that's just going to help when we put this back, that this paint can rub against each other and cause it to actually scuff it. So this painter's tape gives it just an extra layer of protection. So I highly, highly recommend doing this if you want to protect those pieces here where you might get a little bit of chips putting this back, or rocks, or not rocks, but little scratches. So this is just an easy way to prevent some of that. So now you're going to want to grab an extra set of hands, and that way you can get this fascia off. Now, this can be a little bit tricky. The main thing that you're going to try to do is work from the outside in. Now, these clips here, it might be nice to have a plastic trim removal tool to kind of pry these, so have that handy. And something else is you're going to want to make sure that you have a place to store this when you actually take it off. We're using a big cardboard sheet just to kind of keep it protected. So make sure you have a safe spot to put this once it's off. And also, when taking this off, you don't want to pull out too quick, as there is a plug that you'll need to unplug, so you don't want to damage that as well. So take your time with this. We're going to start just on these corners here, start prying back, and try to get this off. Now, you hear a little clinging, that's going to be from our T25 clip. So if that does fall out, make sure you put that back on when you reinstall, but keep this handy. And these little keepers, you can see the plastic just kind of clips in there, and they can fight you pretty good. Just be patient on this, as you don't want to damage those. But some of these can be tricky, so don't be too hard on yourself. So now, these little tabs, sometimes it's easy to kind of pry this down or pry it up on the actual fascia to get it over that tab. So again, be patient here. You might need to work from the other side. So once we kind of got that loose, now that's going to gain us a little bit of extra space. I'm going to kind of lift up a little also to kind of relieve some pressure on that clip. Got it there. Keep working your way towards the middle. So here's that clip I was talking about. This is going to be pretty easy to separate. You're going to want to just pull this tab back, and then you should be able to pry this here. Push that clip in, and it should separate. There we go. Yeah, pushing the clip in a little bit and then pulling really made a big difference. We have our fascia here. We're going to just set this on the cardboard just to kind of keep it safe, and that way it's not going to get scratched. So now we're going to be removing these 5 10mm sockets. Now I'm going to go ahead and make just a quick mark here, because when we tighten them back down, that's going to allow us to know that we actually have these torqued down properly in the same spot. And you can kind of use whatever. I'm using a paint marker, but if you put a little scratch or maybe just a mark with something, just so you can denote where it needs to go, that should be fine. So now we can go ahead and remove our 5 bolts. Now this should be pretty loose here. There are these little clips that kind of keep it in this bracket, so you may need to pop those out, but ours were actually loose. And this wire loom here on both sides is kind of keeping this in place, but we do need to actually get this out of the way here to gain access to our bolts. So we're going to let it hang down for just a little bit here. It doesn't look like there's too much stress on it. Just be careful to not push down on this and damage those wires. So now our bumper beam is exposed, and that means that we can actually go ahead and we're going to take a 15mm and get these taken off. And this one has 5 mounting holes. You have 2 on the passenger and there's 3 on the driver. Some of them actually have 6, kind of depends on what year model that you got. So ours does have 5, so we're gonna go ahead and remove those now. Now I'm kind of just using my hip to keep this in place just so it doesn't fall. But make sure you keep all your hardware as you're going to need that later. And this should just kind of come off and we can set this aside. So now we're going to be removing our reinforcement beam plates here, and you have 3 on each side that are 15 millimeters. Now some models will have 8. It kind of all depends again on the year, but whichever you have, go ahead and you can remove those. Now our support plates are not going to be actually going back on the vehicle, so you can keep these for later or you can throw them away. It's kind of your call, but you are going to want to make sure you have your hardware as we're going to be reusing these. Now you'll see this flat panel where that plate was. Some of them will have a little bit of some of this sealant here that can cause it to be kind of chunked up. If you do have that on yours, just take a plastic scraper and get that off. Ours here does not have that, so we'll continue on. Now you're gonna have these nylon washers. We're gonna go ahead and place one on each of them. And go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So now go ahead and grab your hitch and just slide them over the studs. Now we're going to take our previous nuts that we had and we're just going to do the outside. I'm just going to hand tighten them on there for now on both sides. So just 2 of them will be going on. And before you really tighten it down, this is a good chance to make sure it's properly aligned in the center of the vehicle, as there is a little bit of wiggle room as these are slotted. So just kind of make sure it's lined exactly where you want it. And then from there, we're going to go ahead with our torque wrench and tighten these down to the specified torque setting in the instruction. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, we have these here at eTrailer. Generally, you can rent them at an auto parts store. But this is going to be important because it's going to make sure that it's not going to put too much stress on the studs, but it's also going to be tight enough to not come off. So go ahead and get these torqued down. So now we're going to take our brackets that are in the kit, and you're going to want to align them to where the wider part here of this impact bar, that's going to be the top. This little notch here, that's going to indicate that that goes on the top, and these holes should line up. Now we're going to take the hardware that's supplied from the kit, and we're going to do this in the same procedure for all of them. So take your bolt with your flat washer, and then you're going to take your nylon washer. And then we also have our flange nuts, and what we're going to be doing is feeding these in here, and then we're going to tighten those flange nuts down. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky here, as you're going to have to kind of feed this in. So I'm going to just get one lightly threaded on, and that way I can go back and put my other ones on. And if you go too tight, it's going to be hard to get that nylon washer in. So this is kind of tricky. These edges here are pretty sharp as well, so just be careful. You don't want to cut yourself on this. Okay, so I got that one, the thread started. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same process here. So we'll just make sure that we put our nylon through. Now this last one, it's kind of further in there, so it might get tricky, but you can actually go from the bottom here, just kind of get that thread started. That's going to make it a little bit easier for you. Now we can go ahead, we'll do the same process on the other side, and we'll tighten these down. So now we did the 3 on that side. Ours, since we only had the 5 bolts total, we're going to do the 2 over here. Now during this process, do not tighten them down all the way, as we're still going to need to actually align this hitch. So just finger tight on there, just so it's not going to fall off. Should be plenty for now. So now we're going to take our bumper bar here with those brackets installed, and we're actually going to place it on those studs. Now I'm going to just lift this out of the way. That way we're not kind of trapped having to pull this over the bumper beam. Now they suggest that you slide the brackets out as far as possible while doing this. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you have your friend handy that helped take off the fascia, it might be a good job for them to kind of hold that wiring harness in place. And that way it's not in the way doing this. And so holding my brackets out as far as I can, I'm going to slide these on the studs. You may have to kind of slide it a little to each side to get that on there. And we're going to see we have these factory studs. We have our factory hardware here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just get these two on. Now this is why this is removed, so we can actually gain access to this one. Go ahead and do that on the other side as well. Now before we tighten this down, a little helpful tip to make sure that this is aligned properly. You're going to go to the side here by your bumper impact bar, and on this tapered in edge, you're going to want to measure from here to the outside of our actual bracket there, and it should be right at 1 inch on both sides. So double check both just to know that you're aligned properly before torquing these down. So now we're going to go through and torque all of our hardware down to the proper specifications. I'm going to start with our actual bracket bolts here, or their bracket nuts first. So now for tightening down our bolts that we fed through here, this is going to get a little bit tricky, but our best bet is to actually put a 17 millimeter socket, or I'm sorry, wrench on the actual bolt head. And that's just going to kind of hold that in place as we tighten it down. Now we can still use these access holes to be able to get our 15 millimeter socket in here, but just making sure that we have that 17 on the back is going to make sure that it's not going to spin around on us. So get that on there, and then you can start to tighten this up. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a little on each one, on each bolt, and that way they're kind of evened out as they're pretty still loose. Move to my next one here. And you might have to kind of move it around to get your wrench on there. So now we're going to go back and torque down all of our bumper bolts that we have. You're still going to want to put your 17 millimeter behind there. That way it's not rotating while you're torquing it down. So now you're going to want to grab the actual receiver portion of the hitch, and we're going to go ahead with the long bolts that are included, and we're just going to feed these through here. Now you're going to want the key side on the driver, and you're going to want the head of the bolt on the passenger facing towards the driver's side. So push those in. And now we're going to grab the supplied nuts that came with it. And we're also going to need to torque these down. So it might actually be a little bit easier to get to these with this one out of the way, but we should be able to get both of them torqued down pretty easily here. Now we're going to be using a 15/16 wrench and socket to do that. So get those handy. So now we're going to tighten these down. They may get a little tricky to get to with an impact, so you might have to actually use a wrench. I have a swivel here, which is going to allow us to get onto our front one here. Just go ahead and put the 15/16 wrench on the other side and get these tightened down. And if you need to, you can always use just a socket and a ratchet. It is kind of tricky space-wise, and you will need a deep well in order to get this tightened all the way down, but just to kind of get this started, this seems to be a easier method. So now our final step on these bolts are to torque them down. Now I always try to use my torque wrench on the nut side, as that's actually a little more proper way to do it, and that way it's not cinching it up, and this will give you the proper torque rating. Now, double check the instruction manual because this is different than the other ones that we have done previous, so just make sure you have that properly set. And this one may be tricky to get to. It might not be able to bite onto there. So again, I try my best to only torque down on the nut side, but sometimes just for space, we may have to do it this way. There we go. So now we're ready to put everything back in reverse order, starting with this electrical panel here. Now remember, when you're putting your fascia back on, make sure this plug gets plugged back in, because it's very frustrating to have to take that all back off. So remember to plug that in, and then the rest of it's just going to be in the reverse order that we did to take it all off. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, putting your fascia back on isn't terribly hard, but remember, this bottom portion can kind of get tricky, and you're going to need this to tuck up underneath this portion. So the way that I kind of do it is if you take your plastic trim removal tool, and you can actually kind of create a wedge here, and we'll try to get this to slide back behind there. So holding this down and pushing up. Let's see if we can't get this tucked in there. Go. And now I can kind of just work this down the edge, ideally. There we go. So now we got that slid up. That's going to help that fascia kind of tuck a little bit more in. Now, a little tip, if your metal clip came off on taking the fascia off, make sure you find them first off, but also to get this installed back and without scratching anything, you might want to keep this off, get these all popped into place, and then you can actually put this on once it's actually attached. Now, make sure that nipple part there, the opening, is going to be facing up, and that way your T25 can go in and tighten this down. So peeling back our fender liner here, it's going to allow me to be able to slide this into place. So it does kind of go at a slight angle, but you're going to see, and feel at least with your fingers, there's an indentation where it will actually slot into. So just take your time. And with that pulled back, I was able to get that slid in place, and now we'll be able to tighten that up. We're going to go ahead and reinstall our taillights. Make sure you are plugging those back in and locking that clip as well. Now, with our fascia back on, everything's been buttoned up as far as our taillights and our plugs. Really, all that's left to do is put our receiver tube in. And the great part about this one being a 2022 is it does actually have this access panel. Now, not all Teslas will have that, and you may have to actually trim this. There is a template in the instruction manual, so if yours doesn't have this access panel, you'll simply just cut that to gain access to it. But right here, we just have a little quarter turn with a flathead, and that should open this up. And once this drops out, we can actually get this pulled out. And I see it's a pretty tight fit here on where our Stealth Hitch is. So if it is pinched, that's probably why. Now, this rubber cover here is going to open up. You can just pry that out. Oops, sorry. And in there are going to be your keys. Now, these are important to have because this is what's going to actually be able to lock and unlock your receiver tube once it's placed in there. So let's go ahead and grab the receiver tube. Now, in order to put this in place, you're going to want to take your rubber cap off the lock, which is going to be on the driver's side. And let's go ahead and unlock this. Now, it should pop open like that, and that's going to let you know that it's unlocked. Now, simply you take your receiver tube. I'm going to turn my handle here. And once in place, you should be able to push that up. You're going to hear that clunk. You know it's actually solid. That handle will actually drop down, letting you know that it's in place and in position. Now, once you have it on there, if you want to, you can simply turn that and lock it in. And now it's not going to go anywhere. Now, once you're done using your hitch, whenever you are ready to store it away, no problem. You're simply going to take that same key, unlock it. That's going to pop open, and then the handle, you're just going to reach up, give that a clockwise twist, and that's gonna drop out. So now you can store this in your vehicle and have it ready for next time. And the great part is, once that receiver tube's out, you can simply put your panel back in place, take your flatheads, and you can tighten those up. And now, everything's hidden. That's the great part about the Stealth Hitch, is the fact that once you're not using it, you have no idea that a hitch is there. So there's no unsightly receiver tube hanging down at all times. And whenever you want to hide it up, keep it OEM, that's no problem. It's nice, quick, couple-minute changeover, and you're ready to rock. And that was a look and installation of the Stealth Hitch rack receiver on a 2022 Tesla Model 3. Thanks for watching.